Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Amino Solihin. In this video, I and my partner Dewi Nurholis would like to talk about how to analyze discourse data qualitatively and competencies in language learning, which include linguistic, sociolinguistic, communicative, cognitive, affective, psychomotor, and spiritual ability. Before we go to the main discussion, let us briefly review pragmatics and discourse analysis. The first is pragmatics. Pragmatics is the distinction between a speaker's words literally mean and what the speaker means by his words. It is commonly understood that, pragmatically speaking, in our daily lives, we often say something that we do not mean what we say. In other words, in our daily conversations, we often see that it's not so much what the sentences literally mean compared to what their indirect or implied meaning. For example, during a class, your classmate says, "This classroom is so hot." While it seems like a simple statement, it's actually a polite request to adjust the air conditioner. The next one is discourse analysis. Discourse analysis refers to a continuous stretch of language, especially spoken language larger than a sentence. It is concerned with the study of relationship between language and the context. Moreover, discourse analysis is a set of utterances which constitute any recognizable speech event like conversation, a joke, a sermon, and an interview. To analyze data for language study in terms of pragmatics and discourse data, there are two approaches that can be used. Those are quantitative and qualitative approach. The first is quantitative approach. This approach requires a substantial quantity of data whose regularities can be determined often by detailed statistical means. It focuses on collecting large datasets and applying statistical tools to identify patterns, trends, and correlation within the data. Researchers often use this approach when they want to test hypotheses or make generalizations about language use based on statistical evidence. For example, a researcher might analyze a large corpus of spoken interactions, such as recorded conversations from a television show or a database of social media posts, to examine the frequency of certain speech acts, such as requests, apologies, or compliments. They may use statistical software to determine whether certain variables, such as the social status of speakers or the context of the conversations, influence the frequency of specific speech acts. For instance, the researcher might find that requests are more common in informal settings than informal ones, or that women tend to use apologies more frequently than men. This approach provides a clear numerical basis for making conclusions about language use, but it may not capture the deeper context-dependent meanings or the subtle nuances that emerge in communication. The next one is qualitative approach. This approach emphasizes the interpretative understanding of the data. The results of the data rely more on interpretative insight of the researcher. Researchers using this approach aim to analyze smaller, more focused sets of data in details, looking at the meanings, social functions, and contextual factors that shape how language is used. This approach often involves close reading, coding, and identifying themes or patterns without relying on statistical analysis. For example, a qualitative analysis might focus on a small set of natural conversations, such as a series of interviews or recorded dialogues, to understand how speakers negotiate meaning in a conversation. The researcher may examine how conversational implicatures function in a particular cultural context. For instance, in a conversation between friends, The researcher might analyze how indirectness or politeness strategies, such as using hedges like maybe or could you, are used to maintain face and avoid confrontation, particularly when making requests or giving feedback. The qualitative approach allows for a richer, more context-sensitive analysis of the subtleties in language use, providing insight into how speakers navigate social roles, relationships, and power dynamics through discourse.
Alright, so now let's talk about the data in discourse analysis. So, in discourse analysis, data refers to the various forms of spoken, written, or multimodal communication that are collected and analyzed to explore language is used to construct meaning, negotiate social relationships, and reflect power dynamics. The type of data used in discourse analysis are diverse and can include anything from conversations, speeches, interviews, and text to images, social media posts, and videos. And the nature of data depends on the research focus, the theoretical framework, and the context in which the discourse occurs. The goal of collecting data in discourse analysis is to understand how language operates in real-world settings and how meaning is co-constructed by participants within specific social, cultural, and historical contexts. Now, let's talk about the key types of data in discourse analysis. The first, textual data. So, what is textual data? Textual data in discourse analysis refers to the written forms of communication that are analyzed to explore how meaning is constructed through language. This can include formal documents, literature, online posts, and any other form of written text. For example, a discourse analyst studying environmental policy might examine government reports and legislation related to climate change. The textual data would be analyzed to identify how the language of the documents frames environmental issues, reflecting political ideologies, and priorities.
Okay, let's start with the most obvious. Once textual data, we're talking books, articles, letters, even those really long, rambling Facebook posts your aunt makes. Basically, anything written down is fair game. See, discourse analysts believe that language isn't neutral. It's shaped by social factors, power dynamics, and historical context. By digging into the nitty-gritty of language, the words, the grammar, the structure, we can uncover hidden meanings and ideologies. Think about it like this. Imagine you're reading a political speech. A discourse analyst wouldn't just look at the literal meaning of the words. They'd analyze the metaphors used, the way the speaker addresses their opponents, and even the pauses and repetitions. All of these elements contribute to the overall message and its impact on the audience.
The second is spoken data. Spoken data includes any forms of spoken interaction, such as conversations, interviews, speeches, or phone calls. These types of data is often transcribed to allow for detailed analysis of linguistic features, including tone, pauses, interruptions, and nonverbal cues that influence how meaning is constructed in interaction. For example, a researcher examining doctor-patient communication in medical consultations might record conversations in a clinic. The spoken data would be analyzed to explore how doctors use language to establish authority, deliver diagnoses, and interact with patients.
What about when we actually use our mouths to communicate? That's where spoken data comes in. Think conversations, interviews, speeches, even those awkward encounters with your crush. All of these are rich sources of data for discourse analysts. Now, analyzing spoken data can be tricky. See, when we speak, We use a lot of mems, ahs, and awkward pauses that we don't typically see in written text, but these seemingly insignificant details can actually reveal a lot about the speaker's thought process, their emotional state, and their relationship with the person they're talking to. For example, imagine you're analyzing a job interview. A discourse analyst might pay attention to how often the candidate interrupts the interviewer, their tone of voice when answering questions, and even their body language. All of these factors contribute to the overall impression they make and can influence the outcome of the interview.
The third is multimodal data. Combining text, visuals, and other modes, multimodal data refers to communication that involves multiple modes beyond just text or speech, such as images, videos, gestures, body language, sounds, and spatial arrangement. In multimodal discourse analysis, researchers examine how these various modes work together to construct meaning and convey social messages. For example, in a political campaign advertisement, a researcher might analyze how images of candidates, background music, and slogans work together to convey a particular message or emotional appeal.
All right, buckle up because things are about to get really meta. Multimodal discourse analysis recognizes that communication isn't just about words, it's about the whole shebang: images, videos, gestures, even the way we dress or decorate our spaces. It's like a giant puzzle where every piece contributes to the overall meaning. Think about a movie, for example. The dialogue is important, sure, but so are the visuals, the music, the editing. A discourse analyst might look at how the camera angles influence our perception of the characters, or how the soundtrack creates a specific mood or atmosphere. Even the costumes and set design can communicate subtle messages about power, gender, and social status. Or let's take something like a protest sign. The text is important, obviously, but so are the images, the colors, the font choices, and even the act of physically holding the sign and marching with it. All of these elements work together to create a powerful and multi-layered message.
Alright, so next is institutional data. Institutional data refers to language used in formal settings such as legal, educational, medical, or corporate institutions. This type of data is valuable for understanding how power, authority, and expertise are constructed and maintained through discourse. Institutional discourse often has a structured and rule-governed nature, which reflects the role of hierarchies of participants. For example, a researcher studying educational discourse might analyze classroom interactions to see how teachers and students use language to construct authority and negotiate knowledge. The institutional data could include recorded lessons, student-teacher interactions, and lesson plans.
Finally, let's talk about institutions. Government, schools, hospitals, corporations. These institutions all have their own unique ways of using language to establish power, maintain order, and shape our experiences. Institutional discourse is often characterized by formality, jargon, and a clear hierarchy of speakers. Think about a courtroom, for example. The judge, lawyers, and witnesses all have specific roles to play, and their language is carefully chosen to reflect their position within the legal system. Or consider a doctor-patient interaction. The doctor often uses technical language that can be difficult for patients to understand, which can create a power imbalance in the relationship. By analyzing institutional discourse, we can gain a deeper understanding of how these institutions function, how power is negotiated within them, and how language contributes to the experiences of those who interact with them. Now let's talk about the digital age. The internet has created a whole new world of discourse. From social media posts and online forums to memes and viral videos, and yes, even your late-night Twitter rants are valuable data for discourse analysts. Online discourse is interesting because it's often informal, interactive, and constantly evolving. It allows people to connect with others from all over the world and to participate in discussions on a global scale. But it also presents new challenges for discourse analysts. For example, online communication often relies heavily on emojis, slang, and abbreviations, which can be difficult to interpret. And then there's the whole issue of anonymity, which can make it challenging to determine the speaker's intent or social context. But even with these challenges, online discourse provides a fascinating window into how people communicate, form communities, and express their identities in the digital age.
The next is ethnographic data. So ethnographic data is collected through participant observations, interviews, and field notes, often in natural settings where the researcher is immersed in the environment being studied. For example, a discourse analyst conducting ethnographic research in a workplace setting might observe meetings, take notes on interactions, and conduct interviews with employees to understand how language is used to manage professional relationships, power dynamics, and workplace culture.
Time travel might not be possible yet, but with historical data we can still get a glimpse into the past. This type of data involves analyzing discourse from different historical periods to understand how language, meaning, and social norms have evolved over time. Think about it this way: the way we talk about gender, race, and social justice today is vastly different from how people talked about these issues a century ago. By analyzing historical documents, letters, speeches, and even literature, we can trace these changes in attitudes and beliefs. We can see how certain words and phrases have taken on new meanings over time, and how power structures have influenced the way certain groups are represented in language. Historical data allows us to see that language is not static, but rather a constantly evolving reflection of our changing world.
Now we go on to the methods of data collection in discourse analysis. The first one is recording and transcription. For studies involving spoken discourse, researchers typically record conversations or interviews to ensure accurate data collection. These recordings are then transcribed, often with detailed attention to features like pauses, intonations, and overlaps, which can reveal important aspects of interaction. For example, a researcher recording and transcribing a political debate might analyze not only the words used, but also how candidates use pauses, tones, and interruptions to influence the flow of conversation and assert dominance. Next is ethnographic observation. Ethnographic methods involve the researcher actively engaging with participants in their social environment to observe how language is used in real-life context. This immersive approach allows researchers to collect data that reflect natural language use and social interactions. And next is participant observation. Researchers observe and participate in social settings, taking detailed notes on how language is used to negotiate meanings, relationships, and power. Contextual interviews. In addition to observation, researchers may conduct informal or structured interviews to gather participants' perspective on their own language use. The next is archival research. Archival research involves collecting data from historical documents, legal records, or other official sources. This method is often used in discourse analysis to study how language has changed over time or how institutions maintain power through specific discursive practice. So, in conclusion, data in discourse analysis can come from a wide variety of sources, including spoken, conversations, written text, digital media, and multimodal communication. The type of data collected depends on the research questions and the specific discourse being studied. Whether analyzing institutional language, online interactions, or everyday conversations, discourse analysts use data to uncover how language constructs meanings, reflects social power, and shapes human relationships. By systematically collecting and analyzing data, discourse analysis reveals the intricate ways in which language and society are interconnected. Okay, now let's see an example of how to analyze discourse data qualitatively. The first is oral data. So here is the interview conversation is taken from Grundy in 2000. Now let's talk about the analysis. Let's look at some of the pragmatic effects of their utterance. Pat say, by the way, serve as a warning to Stephen that what she is saying now is not quite as relevant to what went before as might be expected. The word by the way is not part of the way we ask someone their name, more a comment on the status of asking what's your name at this stage of their conversation. Stephen's reply by saying, Stephen, this is so minimal as to seem almost rude. It seems that such a minimal answer may satisfy the request but does not satisfy the person making it, who expects more. Pat's answer in the third line indicates that she is not satisfied with Stephen's short answer, and therefore she intends to give him an indirect way of telling Stephen to ask her for her name. Stephen's answer, saying the same way as Pat's first question, shows that it was a very inappropriate and indicates an awkward. The word it refers to the earlier item, in this case name, which shows there is a cohesive link in the conversation. In other words, it serves as an anaphoric reference. In conclusion, it can be said that even a brief dialogue containing trivial exchange does show how subtle the language is and how pragmatic explains how to produce and understand an expression. Now, let's take a look for the written data. In analyzing the following excerpt of Indonesian English language essay or text, in the first sentence, the writer gives a hint that he seems to be really is an honest man. He did not feel embarrassed, as some people might feel, so admitting and telling the readers that he is a countryman by saying I'm a village man. However, he was trying to show that he lacks education and wants to prove that education is very important in his life. Therefore, he intends to study hard to earn more knowledge and eventually gain a better life. What made him have those philosophies of life were the fact that his parents and relatives did not have a chance to get good education, as they are farmers living in their village instead of in cities. Those realities imply that they lack the level of income of those who live in cities working in office. By saying, this has inspired my brother and sister to continue their study to higher education too, the writer wants to share his experience and the way he sees life and the world, meaning that if you do have a high commitment in doing something, including having a great eagerness to study hard and gain higher degree of education, there will be more people around you have who will get motivated to do the same thing. The writer expresses his religious motivation by saying, thanks God, by His mercy and bless, my brother, sister, and I could finish our study until university, and also I can be like now. The last two sentences in the excerpt indicate that the writer was grateful for what he had achieved, being a public servant, as a high school English teacher, as well as a farmer, and being a student in graduate school. Alright, so now let's continue to the material about interconnected abilities in language learning. So I'm going to talk about the linguistic. Linguistic ability is the capacity to use, understand, and interpret language effectively, encompassing both spoken and written forms. It is a complex cognitive skill that allows individuals to communicate ideas, express emotions, ask questions, and construct a shared understanding with others. This ability develops through both biological and environmental factors and varies widely from person to person. Factors influencing linguistic abilities. Several factors contribute to the development of linguistic ability, which can vary widely among individuals. Key influences include biological factors. So, genetic and brain development play a crucial role in linguistic ability. Next is environmental exposure. The language environment, including early exposure to spoken language, reading, and writing, significantly impact linguistic ability. Children exposed to rich language environments tend to have more advanced language skills. Education and literacy. Formal education helps to develop linguistic skills, especially in reading and writing. Exposure to a variety of texts, from stories to essays, helps build vocabulary, grammar, and comprehension skills. Next is bilingualism and multilingualism. Learning multiple languages can enhance certain aspects of linguistic ability, such as mental flexibility and sensitivity to language structure.
Am I the only one that didn't know how powerful our words can be? It's astonishing how much impact our language has on our daily lives. Let's explore how linguistic ability impacts our lives. From casual conversations to formal speeches, the way we use words shapes our world. Language is more than just a tool for communication. It's a bridge that connects us to others and a key that unlocks countless opportunities. It's a superpower that influences how we connect, understand, and thrive. Whether we are sharing a joke or discussing serious matters, our words matter. Imagine a simple misunderstanding because of a poorly worded text. A single misinterpreted message can lead to confusion and conflict, or a motivational speech that changes lives. The right words at the right time can inspire and uplift. Those are the magic of linguistic skills in action. Think about it. Politicians use words to inspire nations and bring about change. Teachers use them to ignite curiosity and foster a love for learning in their students. Teachers use them to ignite curiosity. They craft their words to make complex subjects understandable and engaging, even in our daily chats. Choosing the right words can make someone's day. A kind word or a thoughtful comment can brighten someone's mood. Remember a time when a friend's kind words cheered you up? That's the power of language at work. That's linguistic power. It's not just about speaking well, it's about making meaningful connections. Linguistic ability isn't just about speaking well, it's about listening, interpreting, and responding effectively. It's a two-way street that requires empathy and understanding. It helps us build relationships, resolve conflicts, and even land that dream job. Effective communication is a cornerstone of success in both personal and professional life. So next time you're crafting an essay or just chatting with friends, remember, your words have power. They can inspire, comfort, and transform. Use them wisely and watch your world transform. Embrace the power of language and see how it can change your life for the better.
Well, now let's continue to sociolinguistics. So, what is sociolinguistics? Sociolinguistics is the descriptive study of the effect of any or all aspects of society, including cultural norms, expectations, and context on language and the way it is used. It can overlap with sociology of language, which focuses on the effect of language on society. Sociolinguistic competence means knowing which word to choose for a given audience and situation to get the desired effect. For instance, say you wanted to get someone's attention, if you were a 17-year-old boy and you spotted your friend Larry walking out to his car, you'd probably utter something loud and informal along the lines of, "Hey Larry." On the other hand, if you were the same 17-year-old boy and saw the school principal drop something in the parking lot as she was walking to her car, you'd more likely utter something along the lines of, "Excuse me, Mrs. Phelps, you dropped your scarf." These word choices has to do with societal expectation on the part of both the speaker and the person to whom he is speaking. If the 17-year-old shout, "Hey, you dropped something," in this instance, it could be considered rude. Okay, so now we go on to the application of sociolinguistics. The first is education. Sociolinguistics can inform language teaching and curriculum development, especially in multilingual classrooms or when teaching English as a second language or ESL. Translation and interpretation. Understanding how language works in different social contexts can improve translation accuracy, especially when dealing with culturally sensitive content. The next is social policy. Sociolinguistics can be used to address language issues in the public sphere, such as language rights, minority languages, and the role of language in governance. So in conclusion, sociolinguistics shows how language use is deeply embedded in social cultures and practices.
Why do 70% of people switch up their language style when talking to friends versus teachers? Let's find out. Sociolinguistics is the study of how society influences the way we speak. It's like being a detective, but for language. Imagine you're at school chatting with your pals. You might use slang, jokes, and casual words. But when you talk to a teacher, your language becomes more formal and polite. That's sociolinguistics in action. Here's another example. Think about accent. Someone from Texas might say y'all, while someone from New York might say you guys. Both are talking about a group of people, but their word choices reflect where they come from. Cool, right? Sociolinguistics helps us understand these language choices and what they say about our identities and social relationships. It's not just about words, but what those words mean in different contexts.
Okay, now we go on to the communicative ability. So what is communicative ability or communicative competence? Communicative competence refers to a learner's ability to use language to communicate successfully. Communicative ability in language learning refers to the skill to effectively convey and interpret messages in a language using both verbal and non-verbal means. It goes beyond knowing grammar and vocabulary. It's about being able to use the language in real-life situations to achieve specific communication goals, like asking for information, expressing opinions, or holding a conversation. Next is communicative ability in language learning. So in language learning, communicative ability is crucial because it's what enables learners to use the language practically. Language courses that focus on communicative competence often use real-life scenarios or like role-playing, group discussions, or problem-solving activities to allow students to practice speaking, listening, reading, and writing in ways that mirror actual communication. This approach encourages students not only memorize language rules, but also to understand the purpose behind language use and adapt it flexibly. Communicative language teaching, or usually called as CLT, for example, emphasizes this by prioritizing the functional use of language in meaningful contexts. This helps learners to build confidence and become better prepared for authentic interaction in the language, whether they are speaking, listening, or reading. Communicative ability includes various skills such as speaking, listening, reading, writing, and non-verbal communication, as well as the ability to negotiate meaning, understand cultural norms, and manage interaction. Next is types of communicative ability in different contexts. The first one, we have interpersonal communication in face-to-face interactions. Communicative ability is critical for building relationships and social bonds. Effective interpersonal communicators can use both verbal and non-verbal skills to express themselves clearly, listen actively, and respond appropriately in dynamic social exchanges. Second is professional communication in professional settings. For example, businesses, education, healthcare, and so on. Communicative ability is essential for conveying expertise, collaborating, negotiating, and maintaining professionalism. This involves clear, concise, and often formal language, as well as the ability to adapt to different communication channels, for example, emails, meetings, reports, and so on. The third is we have academic communication in academic settings. Communicative ability involves presenting and discussing ideas logically and coherently, both in writing essays, research papers, and speaking, maybe presentations and seminars. Academic communications need to be able to structure their arguments, cite sources appropriately, and engage in intellectual discussions. The fourth, we have cross-cultural communication. Communicative ability is especially important in cross-cultural communication, where understanding cultural norms, values, and communication styles is crucial for avoiding misunderstandings and building successful interactions between people from different cultural backgrounds. And the next is digital communication in the age of technology. So communicative ability also extends to digital platforms where individuals must be able to adapt their communication style to different media. For example, emails, instant messaging, video calls, social media, and etc. This requires both written and digital literacy skill, as well as an understanding of how to convey tone and meaning effectively online. So in conclusion, communicative ability is not just about knowing a language, but using it effectively in real-world situations. It requires an understanding of language roles, social norms, and communication strategies to interact successfully in a variety of contexts. The development of communicative ability is a lifelong process that involves honing a wide range of skills, from listening actively to adjusting one's tone and approach depending on the audience and situations. Effective communicators are able to navigate this complexity to ensure mutual understanding and successful communication in both personal and professional interactions.
I'm sure you've heard the news. Communicative ability is the secret sauce to connecting with others. So what is communicative ability? It's the skill to convey your thoughts clearly and effectively. Imagine you're in a group project and you need to share your ideas. If you can explain your thoughts in a way everyone understands, you've got communicative ability. Or think about the last time you asked a teacher for help. Did you clearly explain what you didn't understand? That's using your communicative ability. It's not just about talking, though. Listening is a big part of it too. When you really listen, you understand others better and respond in a way that makes sense to them. So next time you're chatting with friends or presenting in class, remember, clear and effective communication is key. And the best part? The more you practice, the better you'll get. Stay curious and keep communicating, folks. Catch you later.
The next is cognitive ability. In pragmatics, cognitive ability refers to the mental ability to process and infer meaning from the context of communication. In other words, it's mental process that allows a speaker or listener to interpret and make sense of language in context. It includes contextual awareness, inference, and grammatical understanding. Contextual awareness refers to the understanding of meaning based on the context of communication. In other words, it looks at the interpretation of language goes beyond the literal meaning of words and depends on the context in which they are used. For example, imagine a scenario where someone says, "Could you pass the salt?" during a formal dinner. From a cognitive perspective, the listener needs to recognize that this is not a simple question but an indirect request. Understanding that the phrase is a polite way of asking for something helps the listener infer the speaker's intent without needing explicit instruction. Inference refers to the process by which listener or reader derives meaning from an utterance beyond its literal interpretation based on the context, prior knowledge, and conversational cues. For example, in a conversation, someone might say, "I love the way you cook. I wish I could make a meal like this." The listener needs to infer that this is likely a compliment that could also function as a request for the recipe even though the speaker didn't directly ask for it. The ability to make this inference is part of cognitive ability. Grammatical understanding refers to the ability to recognize and interpret the structure of language. In the context of pragmatics, grammatical understanding goes beyond the mere knowledge of sentence structure and encompasses how language is used in context to convey meaning. Applying knowledge of grammar to recognize subtle shifts in meaning, such as the difference between a statement and a question. For example, "You are coming, aren't you?" versus "You are coming." Another example is John goes to the store. He bought some milk. He here is the pronoun referring to John.
We all use words and language every day to interact with people at work. But do we really communicate effectively? Effective communication can be broken down into 3 parts: listening, understanding, and responding. Let's look at these one by one. Listening involves hearing the words that are being said, taking in non-verbal cues such as body language and facial expressions, plus paying attention to voice modulation. We then move on to the next stage, understanding or giving meaning to what we have heard. Most communication breakdowns happen at this stage because we often misunderstand or misinterpret what is being said. When we make errors in interpretation, we are likely to respond incorrectly as well. For example, your boss asks you if the task that he assigned to you has been completed. If you interpret that as the boss blaming you for not completing the task, you are likely to respond with anger. However, if you interpret that as your boss wanting to just know the status of the task, you are likely to feel less angry and defensive. How we interpret what we hear is affected by the thoughts that pop up in our minds when we are listening. At Way Forward, we help you catch these automatic thoughts so you can reduce communication errors and be more productive at work.
The next is affective ability. In pragmatics, affective ability relates to the emotional and social aspects of communication. It includes the ability to recognize and respond to emotional cues and manage relationships using language. People use language to express feelings, politeness, respect, and empathy. And effective ability enables one to navigate these subtle emotional dynamics. For example, if a student says to the teacher, "I'm sorry to bother you, but could you help me with this?" The use of hedging, "I'm sorry to bother you," serves to soften the request, maintaining the teacher's face or social identity. This is an example of effective ability in action using language in a way that manages the emotional dynamics of the relationship. Another example is, would you mind passing the salt? The speaker is using a polite request rather than an imperious command. The effective ability here is the speaker's understanding of the social norms of politeness, using hedging, would you mind, to soften the request and avoid imposing on the listener. And then the example for the empathy, during a conversation where a friend expresses distress over a personal issue, another person might respond with, I can imagine how hard that must be for you, but I'm here if you want to talk. This response shows empathy, a key element of effective ability, because it acknowledges the emotional state of the speaker and offers support.
Have you ever talked with a friend about a problem, only to realize that he just doesn't seem to grasp why the issue is so important to you? Have you ever presented an idea to a group, and it's met with utter confusion? Or maybe you've been in an argument when the other person suddenly accuses you of not listening to what they're saying at all. What's going on here? The answer is miscommunication, and in some form or another, we've all experienced it. It can lead to confusion, animosity, misunderstanding, or even crashing a multi-million-dollar probe into the surface of Mars. The fact is, even when face-to-face with another person, in the very same room and speaking the same language, human communication is incredibly complex. But the good news is that a basic understanding of what happens when we communicate can help us prevent miscommunication. For decades, researchers have asked what happens when we communicate. One interpretation, called the transmission model, views communication as a message that moves directly from one person to another, similar to someone tossing a ball and walking away. But in reality, this simplistic model doesn't account for communication's complexity. Enter the transactional model, which acknowledges the many added challenges of communicating. With this model, it's more accurate to think of communication between people as a game of catch. As we communicate our message, we receive feedback from the other party. Through the transaction, we create meaning together. But from this exchange, further complications arise. It's not like the Star Trek universe, where some characters can Vulcan mind meld, fully sharing thoughts and feelings. As humans, we can't help but send and receive messages through our own subjective lenses. When communicating, one person expresses her interpretation of a message, and the person she's communicating with hears his own interpretation of that message. Our perceptual filters continually shift meanings and interpretations. Remember that game of catch? Imagine it with a lump of clay. As each person touches it, they shape it to fit their own unique perceptions based on any number of variables, like knowledge or past experience, age, race, gender, ethnicity, religion, or family background. Simultaneously, every person interprets the message they receive based on their relationship with the other person and their unique understanding of the semantics and connotations of the exact words being used. They could also be distracted by other stimuli, such as traffic or a growling stomach. Even emotion might cloud their understanding. And by adding more people into a conversation, each with their own subjectivities, the complexity of communication grows exponentially. So as the lump of clay goes back and forth from one person to another, reworked, reshaped, and always changing, it's no wonder our messages sometimes turn into a mush of miscommunication. But luckily, there are some simple practices that can help us all navigate our daily interactions for better communication. 1. Recognize that passive hearing and active listening are not the same. Engage actively with the verbal and nonverbal feedback of others and adjust your message to facilitate greater understanding. 2. Listen with your eyes and ears, as well as with your gut. Remember that communication is more than just words. 3. Take time to understand as you try to be understood. In the rush to express ourselves, It's easy to forget that communication is a two-way street. Be open to what the other person might say. And finally, 4, be aware of your personal perceptual filters. Elements of your experience, including your culture, community, and family, influence how you see the world. Say, this is how I see the problem, but how do you see it? Don't assume that your perception is the objective truth. That'll help you work towards sharing a dialogue with others to reach a common understanding.
The next is psychomotor ability. In pragmatics, this refers to the physical skills involved in communication, particularly when it comes to producing language in context. Psychomotor ability refers to the physical aspects of language production and interpretation, particularly in spoken communication. This includes intonation and prosody and non-verbal cues. Intonation and prosody are the melodic and rhythmic aspects of speech that go beyond the individual sounds of words. They add layers of meaning to language, conveying emotion, attitudes, and intention. For example, the way a person says, "Oh, really?" with rising intonation could indicate surprise or sarcasm, depending on the context. The speaker's ability to use intonation effectively conveys meaning that is beyond the literal words. Another example is raising eyebrows while making a statement can signal irony or doubt. Non-verbal cues are the unspoken elements of communication that convey meaning through body language, facial expressions, gestures, and other visual signals. They often complement or contradict verbal messages and can significantly impact the overall message. For example, in a conversation, if a person is speaking to someone while avoiding eye contact or using crossed arms, these nonverbal cues might suggest discomfort or resistance, even though the person is verbally saying, "I'm fine." Here, the speaker's body language and gestures are crucial in pragmatics because they modify or even contradict the spoken message.
Alice works at a local department store. She spends most of her day interacting with customers and coworkers. There's a lot of talking involved, but there's also another form of nonverbal communication that's being used just as often: body language. Body language is the process of communicating through nonverbal signals. It includes things like our posture, facial expressions, gestures, and more. The meanings of these all vary from culture to culture, but we instinctively read body language and interpret it as some expression of moods, feelings, or intentions. So, in Alice's case, even before she speaks, she may be communicating all kinds of things to customers. For example, if her arms are crossed and she's avoiding eye contact, customers may not find her to be very approachable. However, Alice could be in a friendly mood, even though her body language suggests otherwise. And this isn't necessarily a conscious choice that she's made. This could just be how she habitually presents herself. But if Alice is aware of these habits, she can work on improving her body language. Changing your habits can be difficult, but if you take time to pause and check in with yourself, you can start to notice them and adjust things to become a better nonverbal communicator. This awareness can also be applied to reading others' body language. Let's say Alice notices that her coworker is unusually quiet, has his body turned away from her, and is slouched over. She may pick up that he's upset, or that there's an unspoken issue at hand. Depending on Alice's relationship with him, she may want to give him some space, or ask if anything's wrong. Being aware of the various aspects of body language can make all the difference in how people perceive you and how you perceive them. Be aware of how you present yourself, and you can say a lot without speaking.
The last one is spiritual ability. In pragmatics, it involves the ethical or moral dimensions of language use. This can include the role of cultural values, religious beliefs, and personal ethics in shaping communication. Spiritual ability often comes into play in situations where language reflects deep-seated beliefs or when navigating cross-cultural communication. This ability includes ethical communication, cross-cultural communication, and politeness in religious communication. The first is ethical communication. It refers to the ability to make sound moral judgment and act in accordance with ethical principles. For example, the nurse who is understanding the patient's spiritual beliefs might use language that reflect these beliefs. For example, instead of saying, "I'm sorry for your loss," the nurse might say, May peace be with you as you transition to the next life." This phrasing acknowledges the patient's spiritual beliefs and offers comfort in a way that is meaningful to them. The second is cross-cultural communication. It is the exchange of information between people from different cultural backgrounds. It involves understanding and navigating cultural differences to facilitate effective communication. For example, a Western traveler might say "Assalamualaikum" when meeting people in Saudi Arabia as greeting instead of saying hello or hi. This indicates respect toward the religion that people believe in the country, which is Islam. And the last is politeness in religious communication. As a Muslim, you might say Alhamdulillah when someone sneezes and say Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un when seeing the accident or hearing the news that someone passed away. This word and phrase are rooted in religious and spiritual values. It's an expression of goodwill and recognition of your spiritual beliefs. I think that's all for our presentation in this video today. Thank you very much for watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.